Hello, everyone, and welcome back to one of our next Meet the Agile Academy Ambassador sessions. Today, Richard Russel is joining me. Richard and we've actually never met in person, Richard. Is that correct?
I have no idea how tall you are.
Yeah, I'm not that tall. I'm 175. How tall are you, Richard?
That's taller than I expected. I'm 180, but yeah.
Yeah, okay. I was expecting you to be a bit taller than I am. No, so Richard and I got to meet over LinkedIn. I was very, very curious based on the posts he usually does on being an ex-Amazonian and ex-Googler and writing about OKRs and what good leadership or management looks like. And in many of those posts with many of those posts, I could identify. This is why I reached out. And then at some point we had a larger or longer conversations about OKRs, which is also recorded as part of the Agile Insights series. So today, super happy to have you with us, Richard, as an ambassador. Great to have you on the show.
It's great to be here. And I have enjoyed working and communicating with you in the past. I've enjoyed your content too.
Thank you for that. So Richard, as with all the other ambassadors, I start in the same way. Where did your Agile journey start? Even if you maybe back then didn't call it Agile, but walk me through that.
Yeah, so I think it's funny. Agile has never been a thing that I've been. The brand has never really resonated somehow with me, but at the same time, a lot of what I've done has been in that category of Agile kind of work. I think that it probably started when I was soon out of university, back in the 90s. In some ways, like frustrated with the waterfall model that we were taught. We were literally taught it at university, and I did various other things, and I don't know when I first came across it. It must have been the 2000s or something like that, and it just seemed to make a great deal of sense. There were different ways of doing things and so on, but what happened is we were at Deutsche Bank, I think it was, and people were using this method of like regular releases. I was the release manager. I was like DevOps before we called it DevOps. And I was helping them release these software. And because it was every 2 weeks, I was like, okay, this really makes sense. We're just sort of getting this stuff out there, and we're discovering how it works. And then I saw the manifesto. I was like, okay, that makes sense too. And the Scrum methods and so on sort of make sense. At Amazon, people use Scrum. At Google, people use Scrum. And various other things like that, various other tools. But no one was really passionate or what's the word? Evangelical about this is the way and this is not the way. There was just the philosophy of being agile, of using this regularly, and I found it valuable.
Yeah. I assume maybe at Deutsche Bank, not as much as in Amazon and Google, but the Agile philosophy, as you mentioned, was baked into the organization's DNA, right?
Yeah, so Deutsche Bank was different to that, but the part that I was in was quite agile because we were very fast moving. We were using what was known as Ajax before it was known as Ajax as well. So the whole organization was very fast moving in that particular part of it. It was very client centered. But at Google and Amazon, it was basically just the way we did things. It was all about like, how do we get things in front of customers fast so we can learn quickly? How do we test real stuff in front of real customers as opposed to doing design documents and so on?
Yeah.
Large design documents.
So, Richard, you already mentioned a few steps of your career, right? Deutsche Bank and then Google and Amazon. Now, you are one of the few people that have been both part of Google and Amazon. That's one. The second is you have been part of an even smaller group of people that has taken those insights and is now working as a coach, consultant, trainer, whatever you want to call this, in our case, as an ambassador, with a bunch of clients, helping them gain back to some extent their innovation power, be a bit more, not exactly like, but a bit more like Google and Amazon. Walk me through your experience working at both of those companies, ideally in the order it happened. I don't even remember where you were first. So help me out with that.
Yes, I mean, the experience at Google, I mean, I went from, let me just start with Deutsche Bank. I was at Deutsche Bank doing this DevOps kind of thing, very technical, with a little bit of customer exposure because we were doing this integrating with customers. When I came to Google, I got a lot more customer exposure. So I was working with partners and with other organizations and so on. And so I really sort of saw this firsthand, working not just with the engineering teams, but with partnership managers, commercial negotiators, lawyers, and so on our side, as well as on the other side of the organization. So seeing how our products hit the customer, how they affected the partner, firsthand was really a critical part of that, I guess. And that's where I got a lot of exposure to commercial thinking and understanding how what we do in technology actually lands in the customer and how this actually affects the customer and affects behavior. We would often have this situation where you have a belief about what customers should be doing, what would be the right thing for them to do. And of course, they weren't doing that. They were doing something else. But we had to sort of submit our view of what was right or better to what customers were actually doing, because what we need is for them to use our products, use our software, use our methods and our approaches in a way that works for them. So that was a really big learning for me there, along with a lot of other things like OKRs and tools that we used at Google, which I found really useful. And empowered management was a big thing there, like managers actually paying attention to what people want to do or believe about things and giving them context to make decisions. After that, I had a couple of startups that I was involved in. I went to Amazon. And Amazon is a bit of an intense organization, very, very execution focused. I had a team of 100. We were doing the translations and localization of software. So Amazon.de now has multiple languages, and that was our project. Right? We're translating 10 million products a day. And Amazon has an obsession with customers and customer obsession. Right, that's one of the leadership principles.
So the number one leadership principle.
It is. It's the most important one. And so basically like trying to putting that into operational practice. Like, what do we actually do and how does that affect us making decisions? And what I found really, really interesting at Amazon is that all of these leadership principles are not just things written on a wall. Like Google has some principles, but they're not as well articulated. Amazon's like, they articulate them and they use them explicitly in the interviewing process, in the performance management process, in promotions process, and in if you need to let someone go, the reasons are in the leadership principles. And so they're really lived in the organization. And then in every single meeting that we live them, and we have mechanisms, we have tools, we have like this whole working backwards process with PRFAQs, or the Dear Customer letter that I teach now, is based on, well, what does this look like from a customer perspective? And so using that at Amazon and the mechanisms that we use to make sure that these things actually happen, the deep dive, like the business reviews, all of these things have processes that you follow. They're not like that painful process. It's just like, this is a mechanism that we use to get this thing to happen, to get this actually operational. And I found that incredibly valuable and interesting in Amazon. Of course, Amazon has its own peculiar characters, and converting that for other companies is different, but they do have these mechanisms that really help you live these things. And even when you think about that whole agility, the changingness, the key for Amazon with agility is that everyone in the organization knows and understands enough context to be able to make decisions within their domain. And then they're empowered to make those decisions. And as a manager, your job is to gather context to make sure people have enough context so that the experts who are close to the bone, close to the grindstone, close to the work, can make decisions. And then you trust those decisions.
Yeah, no, this is fascinating. Now, taking everything you learned at Amazon and Google, right? This is part of the work that you're doing today. You're sharing these insights, your learnings, what you considered being valuable, like OKRs at Google, you mentioned this earlier, or like leadership principles and how they're woven into the organizations, how good intentions, right? There's this quote from Jeff Bezos, good intentions don't work, mechanisms do, right? How you create mechanisms so that you increase the chance of people actually living those leadership principles on a day-to-day basis. What is it that you are currently particularly passionate about? So what would be the main focus of your current work?
I think there's three that I do. One is the two of them are very much mechanism focused, and one of them is OKRs, and I help people understand OKRs and apply that in their organization. And the reason for that I find passionate about that is not because OKRs themselves is a magical tool, but because it's a tool for helping people to really understand and articulate and give context around their strategy, right, and what they're doing. So when organizations have a strategy and then they articulate this in like, here are the actual goals, here are the objectives, and here are the key results, and here's how we're going to measure it. It's a mechanism for turning that into reality and translating it into something that people can actually work with, from that slightly more abstract, broader strategy into things that we're actually going to achieve and how we know we were successful in doing them. So that's been one big thing. The second big thing is really like product leadership content. Now, I'd say I've had that in the broader way, largely from Amazon, but also from other startup tools and things that I use. But basically, this comes down to things like the working backwards PRFAQ method, things like customer segmentation and understanding customers and customer discovery and all that sort of stuff. I'm really learning that. And in fact, really getting into the strategy and understanding from the grindstone, from the product manager and the engineering and the engineer at that level, even making sure you really understand the strategy of what you're doing, because every code decision you're making is implementing that strategy. So you need to really understand it, and helping managers to translate that with those tools. So those are the two of the things. The third thing that I'm really passionate about is coaching. And I love to coach leaders and help leaders to empower themselves to empower their teams. And I say that because a lot of managers believe in the empowerment idea about their teams, but somehow they find themselves constrained, and then because they're constrained, they can't empower their teams. So I believe that when you're a manager who empowers teams, you have to be empowered yourself. And if you're not empowered yourself, it's very, very difficult to empower your team.
Okay. This is really good. So OKRs, you and I had a lengthy conversation about. I think everybody that wants to get your perspective on OKRs, we will definitely link that conversation back to this one as well. Yeah. I would be interested in exploring the two other things you mentioned. One, product leadership, and the other one, coaching leaders. Now, product leadership, Marty Kagan, I know you also did some work with Marty, been part of his courses, etc. He is to some extent defining what product leadership is. And in your background, there's his book, Empowered, right?
Yeah.
Which captures a lot of those like essential things what a product leader should do. In your words, what is product leadership and why is it important in organizations?
Yeah, so I mean, I think that product leadership really is fundamentally a business function, right? It's really about leading the organization and being part of the broader leadership team. And this is where I think a lot of the gap between product management that is not successful and product leadership that is not successful and is successful comes in that people tend to think of this as a functional role. It's not, and there is a functional component to it. You are leading these product teams and helping, making sure product managers and product teams are doing product things. They're actually doing discovery. They're doing experiments. They're working with engineering. They got their fingers deep enough into the product of the technology, technology, the customer and market, the business data and how the business works, and the organization to actually make these things work. Those are the four components of product management. And as a product leader, you're making sure that that's working in your function. But the other part of this is really, being a really collaborative part of the leadership team, which sometimes involves allowing product principals to be a bit flexible in order to work with the broader organization. And what I mean by that is that if you're in an organization where the organization is not operating in a proper product model way, for example, and the way you think they should be operating because you've got the expertise, we kind of, in some ways you want to change it, but also you need to respect it and work with what's there. And if you're constantly fighting your team because you've got this clarity of mind about this is the way product should be done, but actually your head of sales, head of marketing, your CEO and your CFO think completely differently, somehow you've got to work with that and understand their needs and then provide solutions and ways that the product team can actually work that meets their needs. And then that will help to change things. That's how change happens. Whereas if you're battling as an evangelist, it doesn't work very well.
Yeah. It's interesting. So within this short period that you just spoke, right, you took the product leadership role out of just being responsible for the products that are being built, also making that person, and that's my interpretation, correct me if I'm wrong, being responsible on how we're building those products. How are we structuring the organization? What are the principles? How do we get to our strategy? How do we create those connections, right? And the product leader being fundamentally a major member of the overall leadership team of the organization.
Yeah.
Now, if that interpretation that I just shared is correct, do you see a lot of organizations actually valuing product leaders the way they probably should be valuing them?
I don't see as many as I would like to see. Mm. And I often see, like, it's particularly more traditional organizations, they find it hard to hire the right caliber of product manager, a product leader in particular. And part of that is because they see CFO and COO and these traditional roles, and then product is kind of like this smaller technical role. And so they pay them 2/3 or a half of what they're paying everyone else. And on the leadership team, and they get these relatively junior people who, to be fair, senior product people are hard to come by. There's not as many of them as there might be of senior CFOs, but they don't they don't value the role enough to hire the caliber of person that they need to deliver the value that they need in the role, if that makes sense. And so
Absolutely.
then they often end up with slightly more junior product people in these roles who then see themselves as more junior, or come in with a battling mentality as opposed to a collaboration mentality, and sort of this confidence that you can collaborate as equals with people who disagree with you.
Yeah. And I think there's this saying: you basically ship your org chart. Now, in many of these organizations, I've seen that multiple times as well. This is why I asked you that question to also see whether you've observed the same things. In most cases, the CPO, like the chief product officer, which would be like the ultimate product leader, is not at the same level as all the other C functions.
Yeah,
Right? In many
that's
cases, they are, for example, under the CTO, right? The CTO is already part of, and sometimes even the CTO is then under the CFO, right? Or whatever,
yeah,
where you're like, hey, this guy, right? Or girl, like whatever it is, should be discussing at the very top, because whatever the CEO, CFO, COO, etc., decide collaboratively to be that strategy, first of all, the product leader should also have a say in that, right? Because they ultimately have to operationalize it. And then the better they understand that, they can actually go and work with their teams and make
that's
that
right.
strategy or make those strategic choices, right? As
Yeah,
Roger Martin would say, on a day-to-day basis. So
yeah.
that's interesting that you more or less observed the same thing.
I would add to that if you're, as an organization, if what you want to do is move your business from sort of like project based, service based, non-recurring, non-repeatable, non-software revenue to more high margin software based revenue, which a lot of organizations want to do. They want to move to this SaaS type model.
Yes.
That fundamentally is a deep strategy conversation, and it's very much about building a product and how do you make a product that actually creates the value for your customers, and you can capture that value. And so if you're going to try and do that, then that conversation needs to be happening at that senior level with someone who really is there
Understand.
with the product. I mean, it's a
Yeah.
fundamental change. So it's an organizational change that then helps you drive the business change. But it's a strategy conversation. It's not something that you have the C-level conversation and then you delegate to a CPO, because it's missing something there.
Yeah. Absolutely. I absolutely. Now, let's move to the other topic you mentioned, coaching leaders and the
Yeah,
topic of empowerment. The situation or the challenge that you highlighted, a lot of leaders be, being challenged by empowering their teams because they are not empowered themselves, which probably connects really well to the chief product owner or product leader
mm.
conversation we just had. How do you approach that? What do you share with those leaders? How do you help them? Because to some extent they cannot change their own level of empowerment, but what they can change is to what extent they empower their teams. How do you approach that?
Well, I think they can, because they can change their level of empowerment, because frequently people are tied down artificially by false beliefs, and one of those false beliefs, I think, is uh, associated with a very good thing. So servant leadership is a very good thing, but at the same time, when that becomes your entire guiding principle, some leaders have this habit of saying, "Well, I'm not going to make decisions. I'm not going to do anything." They're constraining their own actions as leaders
Mhm.
because they're wanting to serve their teams, but by doing so, they're not serving their business and their organization. So they're disempowered as a leader, and trying to find that balance is a really interesting one. Like, how can I be assertive and lead actively whilst also serving my team and making that actually work really well and empowering my team? And the thing is that it's not a pendulum. It's not sort of like a balance. They're complementary, right? When someone's capable of being a leader and making tough decisions, then the team can be empowered within that, and that works really well. And you can serving the team becomes a really effective way of getting those things done. But if you're not focused on which things you're getting done, then it doesn't really matter. Serving the team doesn't. It makes people feel good, but that's about it. The second thing is that I think a lot of organizations, a lot of leaders get tied up with the relationship with their cross-functional peers. And in product leadership, this comes across, especially in the way I sort of referred to earlier on, where people believe that there's a right way and a wrong way, and these people are all wrong, and I've got the right way because I've read all Marty Kagan's books, right? And I want to be an evangelist about this, or whatever it is. Now, this same thing happens with tech people, particularly from the Scrum and Agile sense, when people get very evangelistic about this and try and sort of push everyone else into a particular way of working that may well be good. But when you have that I'm right and you're wrong attitude, then you cause this conflict between you and your peers, your management, and your people you need to work with. And then that then causes you to have to lose influence and be disempowered. If you want to be empowered within that organization, with your peers, with your management, the first thing to do is to build trust with them and really learn from them and make sure that they understand, they believe that you believe them, you trust them, and that you're listening to them and you understand their problems. And in some ways, this is taking a product mindset to the organization. I go and discover not just my customers, but my leaders, my peers, and discover what it means to be a finance leader, discover what they're struggling with. And now I really understand that we can collaborate much better and get results. And then I'm much more empowered because now I'm not just battling these other people. We're actually part of a team that we're collaborating together. We all have more power.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. I really like that first piece you also shared, which reminded me of the concept of the genius of the end from Jim Collins. Not sure whether you know that. So you know it or you don't know it?
No, I'm familiar with Jim Collins, but not Genius
Yeah.
at the End.
So in his book, I think it's Built to Last, he talks about most people being trapped in this concept of the tyranny of the or, right?
Yeah.
Either this, or you mentioned the pendulum, like either you go this way or you go that way. Whereas the best leaders figure out, and that's what he calls the genius of the end, how to do both of those things, right?
Yes.
Be a servant leader and be assertive, right?
Exactly.
And I really think, and I see this with a lot of the leaders that I get to work with. I see this with myself. Even if you understand the concept, it is really the daily practice, like forcing you. Whenever you come at one of these situations where you're like, no, now I'm at a crossroads. Maybe it's not a crossroad, right? How can I combine those things? How can I have both of those things? Maybe in some cases it is actually a crossroad, but failing to go through that mental exercise of trying to evaluate whether there is an and, whether there is a both, I think that's what a lot of leaders are trapped in. And then they always have to choose between this or this. And then it becomes definitely difficult for them, right?
Yeah, it's always moving beyond the intellectual. Like a lot of us, especially at leadership levels, you kind of already know not everything, but lots of things.
Yes.
But the hard part is putting it into practice and actually doing it and
Yes.
dealing with the human, emotional, relational part of being a leader and actually executing these things and putting these decisions into practice and making compromises or finding the end, whatever it is.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, Richard, we are at the end of our time box, but I still have one more question for you, which is, now, I mentioned earlier, you're a rare breed with your experience at Amazon and Google and all the work you've done with startups and even in like older corporations like Deutsche Bank. Where can people learn more about you? Well, what is your favorite way to be connected with if people want
I
to
mean,
reach out?
most it's on LinkedIn. Although I have in the last 6 months started posting less on LinkedIn and more on Substack, and I'm trying to post a bit more on YouTube and podcast as well. But LinkedIn's the best place to connect, and you'll find everything else from there.
All right. Cool. Richard, thank you so much. I'm super happy to have you as part of our Agile Academy Ambassador community. There's so much I and many others can learn from you. And I hope other people found this conversation helpful and they will connect with you or at least follow you on LinkedIn, because I truly believe, and this is, as I mentioned at the very beginning, how I discovered you. And I'm so thankful for that. Thanks, Richard.
Been a pleasure, Sarah, but thank you for your questions are always thought-provoking.